All right, there have been a few reports that the 49ers are receiving trade interest from teams on John Lynch, on Brandon Aiyuk. Although John Lynch did say him and Kyle joke about they would trade each other for the right package. But this is what John Lynch said.
Isn't that the famous Billy Bean line? He traded grandma.
Trade me. It's interesting when you hear these league functions, said Lynch, ownership meetings, combine. A lot of people ask about Brandon Aiyuk. They really appreciate his game and they see it ascending. And this quote is from the print version of Eric Branch's story in the San Francisco Chronicle. Asked about the 5th-year option. He made a comment about, I'd be shocked if we didn't pick it up. We don't have to do it until after the draft, a few days after the draft. But one thing I would say, and you've been in the league, so you know this, right? Teams probably, are they more likely to ask about a player that they know a team has to make a decision on? And the Niners there is just some paperwork, whatever you want to call it. They got to figure things out with Brandon Aiyuk.
Well, they are, financially tied to a lot of expensive players on one side of the ball, despite having a cheap quarterback room, right? As we looked up earlier today, Deebo Samuel's cap hit next year is rather large.
27.5, 28.5?
Did you say 28.3 or something?
Yeah, sounds right.
And Brandon Aiyuk's 5th-year option next year, if they weren't able to get a deal done, would be $14 million. And 5th-year options are just like franchise tags, right? The cap hit is the same as the cash, just fully guaranteed 1 year. So that would be a little complicated. I was I don't want to say taken back, and maybe because there might be some smoke to this, even though, let me get on record, under no circumstances would I trade the guy. I think his value to the 49ers is probably higher than his value would be necessarily around the league, just based on his current stats aren't probably as strong as some star wide receivers. And I think he's closer to he could be a star wide receiver than he's just some really solid player. I think this guy every single year looks dramatically better. He's an excellent player who, for what they asked to do, right, is not just catch the ball, block, which he's more than willing. He has some legendary blocks down the field for Deebo or McCaffrey, does not give up on plays. He stands for everything they look for in terms of toughness, skill, the total package, his focus, his football intelligence. So I would not be in the business of doing that. But if you counter it, you go, they've done things like this before, where they traded once upon a time DeForest Buckner, another fellow Pac-12 guy, high character guy, really good, but at the time was not making Pro Bowls, but anyone that watched him knew that he was really good and his value around the league was high. So, to me, if I had to pick, after this season for the next 6 years who I'd want, I'd probably pick Brandon Aiyuk after Deebo. Right now, you don't necessarily have to make that. To me, Kittle, still under contract, makes a lot of money. Little older than those guys, but these are just discussions. McCaffrey has now been added to the mix. It's not like Christian makes $4 million. He's a double-digit million guy. So these are Trent's makes money. They're going to have to find a new left tackle eventually. It's just expensive.
Yeah.
All of a sudden you're going to look up and Burford and Banks, those guys going to need contract extensions. They were second-round picks. Banks is going into year 3. What if he has a really good year? So these situations come up on you fast. So I understand why the league is asking about him, because, he starts for the overwhelming majority of teams, and he'd be the one for the Giants immediately be their one, right? The Chiefs would take him in a heartbeat. So you could place him on a ton of teams around the league. Hell, you just saw, right, Elijah Moore, who's not really done anything, get traded for a second-round pick. Now, they included a third-round pick, so I don't know what the ultimate value of the pick was, but he's highly thought-after player. Saying Brandon Aiyuk is infinitely more accomplished.
So if Brandon Aiyuk was on the block, you're saying?
Yeah, I think you and I kind of talked through it. Maybe the Chiefs, right, at pick, whatever to be pick 30 this year, I think for sure you would get a second and a third. He's a unique player because his tape, when you watch him move around and make plays, is better than you just pull up his Pro Football Reference stat page. He's not averaging 95 catches the back-to-back years and 10 touchdowns a year. But when you watch him play, his stats, and part of it is his quarterback situation's been a little hit or miss for a decent percentage of his career. But Yeah, I mean, he played for my team any day of the week.
The-
But
the-
do you think it was a little weird when he just didn't say, "Yeah, we're gonna pick up his fifth-year option"? Why wouldn't you just say definitively?
Yeah, I mean, it might be that you are negotiating a contract potentially with him.
But even if so, like, wouldn't you
That
just
might be
say,
that you want to take phone calls on him.
yeah? But wouldn't you go back to DeForest and say that they probably listen a little more than they would ever put out that they would listen? They don't have picks, right? They don't have a first or second round pick this year. So what if you could get like 2 2s?
Maybe they don't want to discourage the phone calls. Yeah. John doesn't want to send the message, leave us alone. We're not trading you Brandon Aiyuk, because he'd love for somebody to offer him a 1 and a 3.
Well, if we separate,
Probably insane, but just a 1.
You trade anybody. Like, just realistically, would you entertain this guy given the type offers you would get? Like, if the Chiefs offered you pick 30, are you doing that deal?
I don't think you do that deal this year.
I don't think you do either.
Not with your current quarterback situation, how badly you need to help those guys. And the thing that makes it complicated too is, yeah, in theory, on paper, we go, all right, Aiyuk is ascending. How many good years can you get with Deebo? Deebo's getting more expensive. At some point, your number one receiver torch gets passed from Deebo to Aiyuk. Deebo's cap number is going to be $28 million in 2024, but his dead cap's 26. In 2025, his dead cap's 15. Is he a trade candidate after this year? Right. You start going through all that and you go, all right, yeah, okay, maybe you extend Aiyuk and you trade Deebo in the same offseason. But what if Deebo has the kind of years that made you pay Deebo again this year? He's had 2 of them now, where your team looks like it's dead in the water and you just start giving the ball to Deebo as much as you can. Now, then you got McCaffrey, and McCaffrey might change the math a little bit, right? You have now 2 guys. When you signed Deebo, you just had a 1 guy that did the receiving and the running. Now you got McCaffrey, and you got 2 guys that can do the receiving and the running. And so maybe McCaffrey, when they look at it, it makes them go, in these 3, if you could only pick 2, you could pick a few different combinations. Like you could pick Deebo and Aiyuk. You could pick McCaffrey and Aiyuk. Would you pick McCaffrey and Deebo as the combination, or are they
pretty risky from a injury standpoint? I think ideally you got to pick one of the 2 guys,
and you pair him with McCaffrey.
And it's weird, like McCaffrey's a pretty special player, but like I've seen Deebo at the highest level be absolutely unstoppable. Like when they're both humming, Deebo's better, but it feels like on just a weekly basis, McCaffrey's a little more dependable. It's weird. It's what makes the 49ers kind of complicated. It's hard to quantify Deebo Samuel, right? Like it's very easy to be like DK Metcalf, AJ Brown, Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb. Just go around the league. Just wide receiver 1. Just quantify their importance. I think Deebo is he's an unquantifiable player. But if you watch the fucking every snap he plays, why his value is so high. But if you just go to the stats, you're like, wait, you're comparing this guy to like AJ Brown, right? You're comparing this guy. Remember, through 3 years, DK Metcalf had like 29 touchdowns. It's like, yeah, it's not apples to apples here, but he's not like an orange, right? He's really an apple too, So it's very bizarre. And the thing with McCaffrey, like he has been banged up before. Brandon Aiyuk's highs might never be as high as those 2 guys. But I don't see how you can look at him and go, that's not a sustainable player given health, and he's been healthy really the majority of his career. Like, does he not have a 12 to 15-year career written all over him?
I mean, yeah.
I
would. If you asked me to bet over under 12, I'd say over.
Well, like, this guy's a better player. You just have to look at
Would
his
you agree with
numbers.
that, though? Like, if I told you Brandon Aiyuk's playing at 36 years old, you go, yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Well, I'll tell you a guy that's going to be doing that. You're going to look up. And again, this guy was drafted higher. He's produced at a higher level. Situations have been different, but like Amari Cooper's going to have like Hall of Fame numbers when it's said and done.
I know.
But you know why? Because when you can just run routes, and I would say Aiyuk is in his category of like route runner, gets open. He's a fucking, what do they say in like the NBA, like a bucket getter? From a wide receiver, these guys just find green grass. just throw them in the vicinity because they're going to be open and the DB is going to be 3 or 4 yards away. That translates for a long time. When you say those type players, like you just look up, there's like Isaac Bruce or whoever, like that type player plays for a long time, the great route runner. Because it's not as predicated on like, well, he lost a step. Like Deshaun Jackson couldn't go deep anymore. It's just harder for him to play. But if you can stay healthy and you hang your hat on route running, I just think that's a very, very sustainable trait. Like if Brandon Aiyuk was a free agent, let's just say has another year where I'll just pick some numbers like 75, 1,106.
Mm-hmm. Which is similar to what he did this year.
I think he would easily, someone would pay him. Obviously, you get inflated numbers in free agency, but he would, when you say get like a 5 for 160 guaranteed with ease.
Well, this is going to be kind of a tiebreaker year, right? 2 years ago was Deebo's 136 touches for almost 1,800 yards and 14 touchdowns. So Deebo's ceiling so far, from a production standpoint, has been higher than Aiyuk's. Somewhat a little less quarterback dependent for his production, right?
Well, he can play 2 positions.
This year, 98 touches for 864 yards and 5 touchdowns. Only played in 13 games. Aiyuk's year this year was 20 more catches or touches than the year before. He had 80. 1,000 yards from scrimmage. Almost all of them. It was just over 1,000. Almost all of them receiving. And 8 touchdowns, all of them receiving. In fact, Aiyuk has had a rushing
he is a receiver.
It's his first year in the league. Yeah. But he put, the point was just he put up more numbers than Deebo did this year. Now Deebo again missed a bunch of games, but that's part of does Deebo miss 5 games again this year?
I think the question you ask yourself with Brandon Aiyuk, and these are hard conversations because he's really good, right? Like did you see McGlinchey? I saw some clips of McGlinchey's press conference. And he was like, the hard part is his last offseason, the 49ers, he's like, I give them a lot of credit. We were very open. They were very open and honest with me. Like, we're not going to be able to afford you. And less unforeseen circumstances, and it came true. But ultimately, I think, like every 49er fan would be like, crazy-ass contract. Denver Broncos, you idiots. That wouldn't be the case with this player. But I do think the 49ers are looking at it right now like, is this guy ever the number 1 wide receiver on a top team? And that's just when I bring up those other names. Like, you know who is? A.J. Brown. Right? DK Metcalf is a number 1 wide receiver. Justin Jefferson, number 1 wide receiver.
Which year did DK Metcalf save his team's ass and put him in the playoffs and the conference championship game?
Hasn't done it yet.
I'm making the case for right. If I'm making the case for Deebo.
But I'm talking about Brandon Aiyuk.
Oh, I'm sorry. Keep going.
I'm talking, so this is, like, Deebo proved, right? Deebo proved that, like, he can carry me and dominate in a different fashion than those guys. Can Brandon Aiyuk? Because Brandon Aiyuk's camp, and in his mind, he's never going to be like, I'm a number 2 wide receiver. And honestly, his confidence is what makes him. But I think you have to have a real conversation. Like, is he ever, I would put I'd say another guy that's ascending that was a higher draft pick and more hyped name, but kind of a similar type player who I'd say is better would be like Devontae Smith. Is Devontae ever going to be a true number 1? But he's probably not like he's better than most 2s. And is that kind of Aiyuk? Right? Because if Aiyuk's your 2, you're in great shape. You see it with the 49ers, right? But, like, do you get to a point where if you have to pull the trigger and move Deebo, can he operate as your 1 with, like, a mixture of Kendrick Bourne, Juwan Jennings types, right? I don't know.
Do you think it's easier to put let me ask you.
Because he could get paid like that.
Let me ask you a hypothetical based on what you just said. If you started with 1 receiver on your team, one team had Devontae Smith, one team had Brandon Aiyuk. Which room do you have an easier time building a well-rounded room in?
I think your second wide receiver on both teams, you're looking for a similar guy. They're built differently, but Deebo's a physical guy and AJ's a physical guy. I think you build your wide receiver room very simple. I'd put him in the same. I'd put Devontae.
All right, so who's a better number 2 receiver, Devontae or Aiyuk?
Well,
I guess what I'm saying is I think Devontae might be harder to find Smith.
Yeah, he's a better player.
So I think he's more likely to be a number 1 receiver because of his speed.
Now, again, he played with like an MVP level quarterback. He had 95 catches this year. But I think that's the question. Like, if you flip flop the two, would Brandon have had 95, 1,200? Potentially.
Yeah, I wouldn't shock me. That would be Brandon's argument. Is I'm doing, I'm like Kittle. I don't block as much as Kittle, but my numbers are suppressed because of where I play. And it makes every catch that I get all the more valuable. I might have less catches, but they're going to be more valuable catches.
I think his conversation is legitimate. The debate internally in the front office, the money, I think, and I understand where I think the whole thing is just, these are just legitimate, tough business conversations that this is where when you draft the guy in the first round, they're pretty lucky that they're able to roll it over and basically go, well, precedent was set. Nick Bosa, 5th-year option, play of the 4th round, then we take care of you. They verbally said that last year about Nick. Nick was cool with it.
Yeah.
Nick is best player in the league on defense. That's what we do. That's what you have to do. You can't bitch or moan. And I don't expect him to. But this is going to be an interesting subplot. Like, what if he goes for a couple games and he's only got 10, his numbers? Because the shitty part about being a wide receiver, to get truly paid by your own team, as we've seen with Christian Kirk, you go if you ever get to hit free agency, but he's a couple years away from that. You do have to produce. Like, Deebo had to do what Deebo had to do, and even then they kind of butted heads for a while.
Yeah. It's interesting for a guy who was once in, I know Kyle says he wasn't in the doghouse, but whatever it was, then he became a team leader. He's getting tested. The Niners are testing him a little bit right now. I don't know if they're intending it that way. I don't think they are. It feels like Brandon already passed that test with them, but it will be interesting if he doesn't get paid right away. Part of being their guy is like handling that, passing that test.
I think it's fair to take an educated guess that maybe they threw out, one of their classic, like, 4 years, $60 million, 27 guaranteed. Like, did they do one of those?
Yeah, and a sponsorship with what's Kittle's deal?
Yeah, DocuSign.
No, it's the glasses.
Zenny.
Yeah, they don't pay us, but DocuSign. Yeah, and Adobe Audition or Adobe Acrobat. You get some Adobe Acrobat. I think it's fair to say, is there gonna be some? When are the Niners? When are the Niners going to get a player sponsored by somebody who's a Leeds sponsor? That's my question. Some company's not even in this country. That's coming.
Well, we'll
whatever that
would
be.
It'll be on TV over there.
Yeah, it'd be like Borscht beer. I don't even know what. Like what? Where do you get that? It's like, wherever Leeds is, that's where you get it. Anything else on this subject?
No.